Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this award-winning Paul Brown Show. This evening, we're going to be dealing with a very important subject that we have in our community, and my guest will be Mr. Delton Adams. He's a famous author, and he's going to be discussing issues that we're facing in our families, the issues of domestic violence, child abuse, incest. How you doing there, Mr. Adams?
I'm good, sir.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, tell the audience a little bit about yourself first.
I am a divorced father of 3 wonderful young adult children. I am a singer. I am a born-again Christian. And now I'm an author. And I'm looking forward to God using my life to impact the lives of many.
And what we're going to be talking about is a subject that's really touching in the lives of our families. And one of the topic is domestic violence. How did you have to go through that in your life?
Even to this day, that's one of the most painful memories that I have to live with for the rest of my life, because my parents were married for 18 years, and as early on as I can remember, even before the first grade, I had to witness my mom endure extreme domestic violence. I mean, there's some situations that I talk about in my book that just, I can't even believe that actually happened, and that my mom survived it, and that her siblings, her 3 children, survived it. So that's a very touchy subject. It's a very painful subject, but it's something that continues to go on in society, and we need to do more as far as bringing it to the forefront, and public service announcement, exposure, educating people about the seriousness of domestic violence.
Okay, when you, as a child, went through something as far as seeing your mother being abused by your father, how did you handle that as a child, and how far along did it go?
There was one particular incident that I write about in my book when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade, when my father had knocked my mother down in the floor in the kitchen, and blood was coming out of the corner of her mouth, and she began to scream and cry and asked me to go get June, which is her brother, my Uncle June. He lived at the end of the apartment complex, he and his wife. And my father put his foot over her head and threatened to crush her skull if I ran out of the door to go get help for my mom. And so then he demanded that I go back in my bedroom, and I just cried, and I ran in the bedroom, and I just felt tormented because I was helpless. I was absolutely helpless. I was too afraid of him, and so what can you do other than just lay in the bed and cry and hope that your mother survived another round of domestic violence.
Okay, as you notice this going on over and over, what point didn't you feel like you needed to contact like the police or something, or authority, or tell someone?
At the time, being so very young, I was unable to even think that way. You're talking about 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, 8th grade. It was, my parents divorced after the 8th grade, and it wasn't until after the 8th grade that I began to think about ways of getting back at my father. But I was just so relieved that my parents finally did divorce after the 8th grade. But there were so many incidences all the way up until my parents divorced, whereas my mom was in a situation where we literally thought our father was going to kill her. And just knowing that I would have to get dressed in the morning to get ready to go out to the bus stop, but then I would stop by the master bedroom, hoping that my mother literally was not in the bedroom dead, because at times my father during the night would lock the master bedroom door so that he could beat her like he wanted to, because by this time we were in middle school, so we were a little bit bigger than we were in elementary school. And so that we would not be able to come to her rescue, he would lock her in the bedroom and then beat her. And so it's just a painful reminder of all of the extreme domestic violence that my mom had to endure, and that we also had to suffer through as well.
When you had to go to school, how were you able to go through the process of going through the school, in class, dealing with this type of thing going on at home?
I can look back on my report cards and see during the times whereas my mom was enduring extreme domestic violence that I had really bad grades in school because it was very hard to stay focused. My father was a prominent businessman, and my mom helped my father run several of his businesses. And I remember my mom being in there in a retail record store looking so beautiful, but she had to wear shades most oftentimes because her eyes would be black and blue and her lip busted up. And so, you know, she, but in spite of all that, I can honestly say that my mother, she showed us love and she was a pillar of strength for us. And it's amazing how a woman can endure so much and still try to be there to protect her children. So once again, I am really amazed, and it just lets me know that God had his hands on my mother because it's a miracle that she was never hospitalized due to the extreme domestic violence that she endured throughout the majority of the marriage.
Okay, you said you had sisters?
I have one older sister and a younger brother who I was raised with.
And how were they able to deal with that type of situation going on at the house? And did y'all discuss it among each other?
We were too young. We really didn't discuss this. It was something that we knew was a part of our everyday life. We had a father that we loved. We had a mother that we loved. We probably, in our subconscious mind, we wanted to appear like we were this happy, normal family. And it was just something that we were all a victim of. My mom and her 3 children, we were all a victim of domestic violence because we would get beat if we got too close and tried to intervene, even when we got older. And so it was something that we just, when I look back, we were just in a trap. You know, we was in a family household that we knew that domestic violence was almost a part of our everyday life.
So was your mother divorcing her husband, was that the way how she got out of the relationship, or did she contact someone for help, or how did it end for her?
It's interesting that you said that because to my knowledge, I can not recall my mother not once ever calling the police for help. My father sold our dream house that he had built. So my mother never filed for a divorce. She was just one of those kind of women that she was in a marriage, and I guess she was going to stay in the marriage and endure domestic violence like so many women do today. You know, you're just stuck in a relationship that you feel that you can't get out of.
Do you recommend that for the ladies that's going through these situations, or how would you feel like they should do? What should they do?
Oh, absolutely not. You need to report this immediately. If you're a child, if you're someone that is knowledgeable of domestic violence, you need to report this to the proper officials because so many don't even survive, don't even make it out alive. Domestic violence is what it is. It's domestic violence, and oftentimes it's fatal. And so I definitely encourage anyone and everyone who is knowledgeable of domestic violence to report it to the proper officials. And if you are a perpetrator of domestic violence, I even encourage them to get the necessary help that they desperately need.
Okay, another topic we're going to talk about, the topic of incest. I know you said that happened in your life. Tell us a little about incest and what it relates to you and your upbringing.
In my book, I can chronologize. It's chronicle of almost 100 years plus of incest on my dad's side of the family. And so when I was in the 2nd and 3rd grade, my father owned a very prominent nightclub, and my mom helped my father to run the nightclub on the weekend. And so my one of my dad's brothers was my babysitter, and he was in charge of looking after me. and he would allow my older sister to play outside late at night, give her money to go to the convenience store just so he could have me to himself. And so it's been alleged that he too was a victim of incest. But that's something that is a very painful reminder to me. And after 27 years of nightmares and trying to make myself believe that that didn't happen to me, wow. I can say now that I'm free. I'm free to talk about incest because I realize it's a much bigger issue than my own personal story. And it wasn't until I started sharing about my own personal trauma of incest that I realized that so many other people have been victims of incest. And so once again, this is a reality, but it's true, and people need to be straightforward and honest about the fact that incest happens, and it crosses all racial barriers. It crosses all socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter if you're black or white or rich or poor. Incest happens in all cultures and all nationalities, and so it is a very devastating. Suicide is one of the highest associations with childhood sexual abuse, incest. And so it's taken me a long time, but I'm glad that I survived it, and I'm glad that I'm now strong enough and no longer too ashamed to talk about and be open and honest and say that I am a victim of incest.
I got a very important question. Did you ever decide to tell your parents or someone that this was going on?
It wasn't until I was married and had 2 of my 3 children born before I was able to come to grips with the fact that I was a victim of incest. And so I remember telling my father in Louisville, Kentucky, where he used to live, and told him that there was something that had been torn in me my entire life and that I just had to tell him. And so I told him about his brother, who used to be my babysitter. But my incest started at age 7 with my uncle, but I first started getting sexually abused by my female babysitter at the age of 3. And it's amazing how a young child as young as 3 years old can be traumatized, and you have this vivid imagination like I do, and you remember it just like it was yesterday.
Didn't your parents see some type of clue? I mean, the female babysitter, didn't they see some type of behavior that you had been going through?
In talking to my mom now, as a matter of fact, she just mentioned the other day, when she looked back, there were signs of me going through something traumatic. But even now, a lot of families, a lot of parents are not aware of the signs to look for in a victim of sexual abuse or incest. It's not been but in recent years that the educational system has been made aware of certain signs to look for in children that may show signs of abuse, sexual abuse.
Can you give us like a couple of signs that we can look for?
Anger. Anger is oftentimes a good indication. A child that's overly aggressive, or a child that may be very shy and withdrawn and doesn't have good social skills. And in addition to that, more specifically, bedwetting. Bedwetting is a good indication. Being that I was a childhood victim of long-term sexual abuse, I wet the bed probably until about the 5th or 6th grade. And I remember getting beat by my father because I would wet the bed, and he told me that I was just entirely too old to be wetting the bed. And it wasn't until I became an adult and began to do research on my own and find out that that's one of the signs of, that's a good indication of a child perhaps being a victim of childhood sexual abuse, is bedwetting.
Okay, as far as the incest, what type of relationship do you have with your uncle now, especially going through all those things that you were going through with him?
It's interesting that you asked me that question because I see him periodically year after year, like at a family
Correct.
gathering. And in my book, I talk about just having to go with the flow. So I say that I've been an enabler as well as other family members. We have enabled people like my uncle and my father to continue to do what they did for so many years, because you don't say anything. You feel like you're trapped. And even as an adult, I felt trapped. I see him, we talk, we laugh, we talk about family, life, and as if nothing ever happened. And it wasn't until I was able to really come to grips with my own past and get into counseling and therapy that I realized that it's time to speak out about it. And so I see my uncle now. I love him. I forgave him. I've forgiven myself, because you internalize it. And it's funny how your mind plays tricks on you, and you grow up and you think that you must have done something wrong to deserve it, and you want to be loved and accepted. So this uncle, once again, even when I see him now, we talk and we laugh and we smile, and I look at him, and in my mind I'm saying to myself, wow, you really act like as if nothing never happened, and that you didn't make my childhood a living hell.
And that's a good thing that I was going to ask you. How can you sit there and tell us that you laugh and smile with this individual who did all this and affected you mentally for all these years, and it's like a joke to him? Or take
It's
your time.
only been by the grace of God. I can only speak for me, but when I first shared with my dad's sister, one of my dad's sisters, what her brother did to me, she didn't seem shocked at all. She immediately told me, let me tell you how God gave me the strength to forgive my father, your grandfather. And this was my dad's sister telling me how my grandfather raped her from the age of 5 to the age of 13. And so she was well aware of the incest that had been going on in the family even before I was born. And so she was the first one to minister to me, to help me to release the anger and to give it to God, so God that would give me the strength so that I could forgive my uncle. And she was the first example. And so I just want to thank my Aunt Selena for allowing God to use her to help me to begin the healing process to forgive my uncle and my father.
Being that you said this is something that, I guess, hereditary passed on, do you feel like it may happen to you in your situation, in your children?
No, that's a generational curse that the Bible clearly defines, and that curse has been broken.
Okay.
And so, you know, though you are a product of your environment, as I learned through education and research, you're not locked in. And so oftentimes victims become perpetrators because it is alleged that my father and my uncle were also victims of incest.
Correct.
But however, there are people that have never been victims of incest that still sexually abuse children.
And that's why, I guess, the reason why I said that question is the fact of the matter is, you said it probably happened to them, and then they came along and did it to you. So I'm saying, do you ever think it may happen to you doing it to your kids or to some other child?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is, when you think about it, we all have choices.
Correct.
We all have choices. And so you still have to make a choice as to whether or not you want to violate somebody else's child or your own child. And we all have a conscience. Now, you can block things out of your mind and be in denial and know that what you're doing is wrong, but you go ahead and do it anyway. And I can only say it's been by the grace and the mercy of God that I've never gotten sexually aroused by thinking about abusing my children or anybody else's child. That's a very evil, dark place in your mind. That's a very mentally sick mind to be an adult and to be of age and to understand that if I do this to a child, then I'm doing something that is not just against the law, but it's immoral, it's ungodly, and it could be devastating to somebody else. And so by no means, I am the very opposite of that. I am an advocate for those that are victims and have been for a very long time. And so, you know, children are to be loved and to be protected and to be cared for, not to be violated and traumatized by those who they love and they trust, which oftentimes when children are victims of sexual abuse, be it incest or not, it's coming from somebody that they know, a family member, a coach, a preacher, somebody that you know. Is less likely to be from a total stranger. It's those caregivers, the people that you love and you trust, and you believe that they will be there to protect your children and be positive role models, not to traumatize and to violate your children.
Okay, have you ever sat down with your children and told them exactly the history of this going on in the family, and how do they handle it?
I told my kids years ago, by the way, my kids are ages 19, 21, and 23,
Okay.
so they're young adults now.
Correct.
And I told my kids when they were probably in elementary school, I feel like I owed that to them because they were my children. I began to see that I had some issues in my life. I think that my own childhood traumas cost me my marriage because being a very insecure man and being just very traumatized and not even realizing what a troubled life I had lived, even though I graduated from high school and went off to college. But I still had some issues in my life that I was challenged with. And then marrying a beautiful woman that comes from a stable household environment, a Christian environment at that. And I think I pursued my degree in human development and family studies because I wanted to educate myself and find out what is, quote unquote, a normal family supposed to be like. And so, once again, I felt like I owed it to my ex-wife and my children early on that I was a victim of incest and the domestic violence and all the things that I write about in my book.
Were you and your wife, your ex-wife, did you ever communicate this to her, and how did was she able to help you out to deal with this?
It's interesting that you asked me that question because it was during a church service that my wife and I was attending at our own local church. And so that the viewers can kind of understand where I'm coming from, we really felt the presence of God during the service. And I remember, and I write about it in my book, I remember just screaming out and saying that I was raped. And my wife looked at me as if to say, what? Because at that time, I had never admitted it. It took me 27 years. I talk about 27 years of complete silence. I tried to make myself believe for 27 years that what happened to me in my childhood did not happen, and that those were bad dreams, and that was nightmares, and that they would eventually go away. And so it was not something that I was consciously aware of that I need to go and tell somebody about. And so it was during a church service that I yelled out, and I just began to cry, you know, that I had been raped. And from there, you know, I eventually got into counseling. So it didn't come out with me just consciously saying, oh, let me tell you about my child. It wasn't until I first just screamed out in a church service and the whole congregation heard me say that I was raped.
So where is Delton Adams? Where are you right now? Because I know God is really putting a lot of things into your life right now. So tell the audience about where you're at right now.
I would honestly say that I am still being healed from the things that I'm sharing about, the things that I write about in my book. I have been in counseling, been in therapy, but this is the first time that I'm now going public with my story. And so at any given time, I'm subject to feel that raw emotion of, excuse me.
Go ahead, sir, take your time.
I'm, as you can see, still being healed. I'm in a good place, though. God has given me purpose unlike never before. I'm living to tell the story.
Correct.
I'm a gentleman that I write about in my book that 11 years ago in the parking lot at Walmart, I put a loaded gun to my head, and I had the loaded gun to this side of my temple and the cell phone in my left hand, and I began to call my family members, and I even called my father and told him that I understood suicide. I understood why his mother, my grandmother, on her third suicide attempt drank liquid Drano, because she would catch her husband, my grandfather, raping her children, and when she tried to come to their defense, she was helpless. And so I understand suicide. I understand how you could feel so overwhelmed with grief. You feel psychologically trapped, and you feel there's no way out. And so I'm in recovery. I'm in a good place. I acknowledge, I'm not in denial. I acknowledge what happened to me was not my fault, and that I give it to God. So I'm still being healed, but I thank God that I'm able to talk about it.
Okay, we're running short on time, Mr. Adams, so really appreciate you coming on the show, discussing to the audience about these important topics, and I really wish you would come back and discuss more, because it's just like you said, it's a healing process, not only for yourself, but our viewing audience who's out there who's dealing with the same type situations in their homes. So I appreciate you coming on the show, and you continue to be strong, because we know that God has a process. He has a place for you.
Yes.
You know, what was one thing you'd like to say to our audience as we leave?
If you have been a victim of domestic violence, incest, child abuse, physical abuse, please admit that and acknowledge that it wasn't your fault, and that get the necessary help that you need, so that perhaps one day you can help someone else, because free people free other people, and hurt people hurt other people.
Thank you for watching the show. Delton Adams. You be encouraged, audience.